Welcome to Marketing, Media, and Money, your go-to podcast for proven profitable strategies, secrets, and resources from industry experts and global influencers to help you scale your business, shorten your learning curve, and stand out in a crowded, noisy marketplace. Here's your host, award-winning marketing and media strategist and international speaker, Patty Farmer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. I'm really excited today about this show because I have somebody on here that literally I've been talking to at least a couple years, and we've been talking about all the things we're talking about today, plus, and I think it's really going to be inspiring because do you ever wonder why some people seem to effortlessly command attention on camera while others simply fade into the background, literally? Imagine transforming the way you present yourself and your space online, making powerful first impressions and exuding confidence, feeling authentic and professional in every virtual interaction. Now, we all spend so much time on Zoom or whatever your online platform is, but how would you like to be able to do it better, make a better first impression? And we all know what that leads to. So my guest today, we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. So Amy Lokken is our guest today. She's a visual presence designer who is the visionary and creative force behind Mud Modular and the AF behind the Amy Factor. Amy has a passion for transforming spaces and enhancing visual presence with psychological insights that elevate remote and hybrid professionals globally to command attention, make exceptional first impressions, and exude authentic confidence on camera in real environments. With 10 international awards and countless media appearances, Amy is a renowned expert in creating stunning visual experiences that captivate and inspire. Drawing from her background in industrial and theatrical design, Amy has developed a unique approach to visual presence design that helps businesses stand out and connect with their audience through the camera lens, whether it's a trade show, a webinar, or a TV interview. And she knows how to make it memorable with the Amy Factor. So I just love that. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a fun conversation, as they always are with you.
I just love that, right? And, first, if you're watching this, just take a look at her background. Isn't it beautiful? I mean, she knows what she's talking about when she does it. It is the Amy Factor. It has been the Amy Factor the whole time that I have ever known her. So I really love it. I just had to have her on the show so we could share it with you. So let's kind of jump right in, though, because I really love that you're not just talking about backgrounds, right? You're actually talking about visual presence. And just that whole title of being a visual presence designer, I just think that's just beautiful right there. But for those of us that are out there listening, can you define visual presence and what are some of the various factors that influence it?
Yeah, so visual presence, obviously, the first thing people think of is us, like as face value, so to speak, if that makes sense. We think of how we're dressed, how we're groomed, all those things, because it's the first thing people see. However, there is a secondary aspect to it, and it actually there's probably several actually, but I'll focus on two additional things beyond just our overall physical presence, and especially for those people who aren't seeing us and they're just listening to us. It has to do with our essence and how we feel inside ourselves, as well as the environment in which we place ourselves in. So when we think about visual presence, it's all of those combined into one. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that really does make sense. And you know what? One of the things I always love when my guests come on to look at their website, see if there's anything new since we booked them that might be happening. But something on your website really caught my eye. And it was that you believe your first impression in a virtual interaction is like a virtual handshake, and that it actually sets the tone for the entire relationship. Can you share more about that? Because I found that very intriguing.
Yeah. Well, if we really think about when back in the day, prior to the whole, digital age of how we show up and interact with literally the world, and we're able to build those relationships with a click today is pretty impressive in a lot of ways. But we need to think back to when we would see each other in person at networking events, or I would show up at your, office or conference room, or you would be in mine, and we would immediately go to shake a hand. That's how we introduce ourselves. We've all heard about, especially men, shaking a female's hand instantly gives us a perception of how they perceive us. So it's either the fish or it's a true, handshake and giving us that equal aspect. So when we pop up on each other's screen, it's no different than walking into a physical environment. And we need to get our mindset around that. So when I'm showing up for you, Patty, and your audience, or whoever it is, it really doesn't matter. I am not showing up for myself. I'm actually showing up for you because I respect you. I value you. And those are pieces of my core in building those relationships. So when we think of popping up in the Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch, whichever, genre you want to be in, I'm definitely in both and remember both very well. But that's what we're doing today. And the thing is we can actually make deeper connections, in my belief, across the camera lens than we can when we used to meet in either each other's, office space or a mutual ground. And the reason for that is we're both in our safe zones right now. Okay. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. So it goes back to your first question about visual presence. That virtual handshake is how we feel inside our space. Not just what you're seeing, but what am I seeing beyond that camera lens that's going to affect how that virtual handshake goes. So if I'm seeing a lot of clutter and disarray, my focus is not going to be as pristine and honest and authentic as it would be in a different environment. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And it really makes me think about what you said about, the click. Because the reality really is that back in the day, if you ask people how they got business, the number one thing people would say is word of mouth. That's what they always said, right? Mm-hmm. And I really believe that right now in the environment that we're in, word of mouth is probably even more important than word of mouth, right? Because it's really about, we spend so much time online. So the reality really is when you would get those relationships and you would meet people face to face and you would spend time with them, yes, word of mouth really did matter. And not to say it doesn't matter now, right. But when you think about where you're spending your time and how much of the time you're spending where, word of mouth matters even more than it ever has.
I love that, Patty, and I may be stealing that moving forward, but I'll give you full.
Everybody I say it to wants to say that. They're like, Patty, I've never heard that before. And I'm like, because I made it up. Like, it's mine. But, when you think about it, so one of the things that you talk about that I found really interesting, and that's why I had to put it in my introduction, because it really caught my eye, really, is psychological insights. Like, really? Like, who really thinks about that when we are online, right? Across from each other. But how do psychological insights play a role in this approach to designing spaces and enhancing visual presence? Because first of all, what do you consider psychological insights? Let's have some of those. But can you provide an example of how this has made maybe a difference for a client in having these psychological insights?
Absolutely. So it kind of goes back to the virtual handshake and that first pop-up of impressions. So a lot of times we think of first impressions happening, and there's research that says within 7 seconds. I would argue that in today's world of digital age, we make those snap judgments in that first 10th of a second when we first very much pop up. And when I talk about the psychological insights, it's all about connecting on a subconscious level, not the conscious level. It's our subconscious that actually makes those conscious decisions. And if we don't show up as authentically as our best self, we teeter that line between subconscious and conscious. So if there's not an immediate positive in a 10th of a second, a connection, because we really do that, those subconscious first impressions literally happen within that 10th of a second. And that's where we need to redefine how we're presenting ourselves. So when I talk about psychological insights, it's understanding that we want to create an emotion. So when I bridge a person's personal brand with their corporate or company brand, they are two different things in most cases. And they should be, in all honesty. Yes, there should be some crossover. I fully believe that a lot of your core beliefs and values should cross over, especially if you're an entrepreneur in that world. However, when we bring that subconscious to the level that I believe we should, we hit an emotion. So when we bridge those two brands together, we're giving you that essence of who you are as a person. What is it going to be like to work with me? What is it going to be like to work with you? Like there has to be that. And I think over the last 4 years, we've realized that we need that human interaction. Like we opened up our homes, our safe zones to the world in a blink of an eye, which was very uncomfortable for a lot of us. And immediately our personal and our professional lives intertwined.
It's almost like when we connect with somebody in their personal space, it's almost like you kind of get a glimpse into who they are behind the scenes, right? So when you're thinking about that, you have to say to yourself, well, what is it that I really want them to see, right? You know, it's kind of like when you're speaking, you sort of control the narrative, but is your background doing that too? Is your space doing that? Does it align with who you say you are and how you're showing up? So I could see how that would be really important. So what would you say are some key elements or strategies? You know, I love the word strategy, right? That professionals can use to command attention and make exceptional first impressions on camera.
Absolutely. So the first and foremost one, and I may get some hate because I always get some backlash a little bit on this, is please, for the love of God and your reputation, do not blur your background or use a fake background. Because subconsciously, the first and the 10th of a second, you have just blocked them from trusting you. Because they're not going to fully listen to much of what you're honestly saying because they're going to be wondering what you're hiding. So subconsciously, there is an immediate distrust, whether it's just blurred or you're physically using a false background. Now, I get it. We've seen it done in media forever. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're in media and they have a true 100% perfect green screen. They also have a good camera that's able to give a little bit more of that proper depth, because when we don't, we all look like a bad Photoshop job.
And they have more credibility too, right? They have this credibility that's built in already.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just launched a course that people can purchase. It's really quick. It was designed for bite-sized pieces, like literally, I think my longest lesson in it is under 6 minutes. And most of them are on that 2 to 3 minute, but it's meant to be the basics to help get you to see spaces and how to put yourself in them authentically. So there's always places, like I even have a section on the road. So I take you inside an RV and a hotel room and a co-working space and all of this. But it's finding those locations that resonate with who you are and your core. So obviously, for those of you who can't see me and those of you who can, I have a very textured wall behind me. I also have a lot of greenery. I am a beautiful blend of being raised as a farm girl in rural mid-America and have the soul essence of a city girl. So I love nature, but I also really love that sleek, contemporary feeling of the city. And how do you blend that together? My brands are very similar to that as well. So when for instance, one of the best things I help people understand is place some greenery. If anything, that's going to add some depth, some dimension, and it's going to give you life and energy. If you can only find a blank wall.
That makes a lot of sense, though, when you think about it, right? Mm-hmm. So it is about what do we see in the background when we are talking to people. I know one of the things that I used to see, I don't see it so much anymore, is when people are using those virtual backgrounds. They used to use these virtual backgrounds that were these luxury lofts and all this stuff. And when they would first come on, I would think to myself, whoa. And it kind of gave the impression that they were like, oh, luxury would kind of elevate until they moved wrong. And you could tell that it wasn't real. And then all of a sudden you were like, okay, right. And so I think that now I don't see as much of that. I still do see virtual backgrounds, but I do see them differently. But if you're going to use one, which I actually agree with you, it does make it look like, what are you hiding? Mm-hmm. But I do feel like if you're going to do it, at least make it be something that it's obvious that it is so that people know it, not that it's looking like you're trying to portray something that really isn't what it is. So I think that will help a little bit with the trust factor for sure. Mm-hmm. So could you share a few tips on how to be consistent in your professional image? Because that is something that, I think can be confusing, right? Here you have your brand and stuff. And if one time they're seeing you like this and the next time they're seeing you like that, and they're like, oh, well, which one is it? Now, with that said, I have seen people mirror or merge the things together in a way where this is professional me. And then here's where you get to see me behind the scenes in a baseball cap and whatever. And depending upon your brand, I think that can work really, really well. Right. But you still have to be consistent and not, you just have to be consistent. So, what are some tips on how they can be consistent in their professional image, even if they do different things, even if they want to say, oh, this is professional me and this is me a little bit more casual?
I bet this is a great question. And I love this question. And so many things were going through my mind as you were asking the question. And
awesome.
Pardon?
Awesome.
So I'm going to start actually with J-Lo. Jennifer Lopez is the perfect example of how you blend your professional and your personal life together. So however you feel about Jennifer Lopez or J-Lo, Jenny from the block, whichever version you want to refer to her as, because there are kind of three there, but there is a consistency. If you think about Jennifer Lopez, red carpet, Jenny from the block, and J-Lo. So you have these three kind of different personas, but there's you know what to expect, and you see the commonality, the common thread through everything. So the reason I bring her up, and I use her as an example, and I often do this with a lot of my clients who struggle between how do we honestly blend that? And we blend it by going back to the fact that your visual presence is the essence of who you are at your core. So when we understand what that is, and you fully own that, you own who you are on both sides, it's a natural thing to show up as, whether because you're not having to think so hard about it. You have embraced who you are as a professional and who you are as a person. And again, there's got to be a common line there and a thread that ties it all together. I don't believe that you should be showing up 100% logoed in your logo. Your company brand is not just your logo. It's not just...
Thank you for saying that.
Oh my God. Like, so many people think a brand is their logo, and it's not. It's an accessory. So think of when you get dressed in the morning, male or female, there are different things that we all put on. Some will call jewelry, an accessory. Others will call it, the icing on the cake and whatever it is. But men do the same thing with their watches or eyeglasses or whatever it is. Those are pieces that add to us. That's what a logo is. It's not your identity at all. It's a recognizable thing, but that's what you play off of to build upon that consistency. So for instance, like I mentioned, I have greenery in the background. I have a textured wall. So when I'm at a conference and I need to jump on a call, I have elements that I'm going to be able to find in the wild that are going to resonate with my brand. Okay. Even if I'm in my car and I have to take a call, I will find a location that hopefully has some type of greenery or something with texture in it, because I'm a multi-layered person. We all are. That's why I think finding texture and adding texture, be it through color, through accessories, whether it's artwork, it's a sculpture, it's an award, if that's something that you feel really strong about that you need to have around you, it's those things like that that help keep things consistent. I am often known for my glasses. Now, I use them for reading, and thank you for, being on in front of a computer for way too long over the last few years. But I have them also, these are blue blockers and things like that. We all have those things, and I like to switch them up. They're part of my personality. So finding those things, earrings are a part of my personality. Texture, I love being around depth and dimension and understanding the scale of things. So for instance, like when you're on your phone and you're doing a video or a call, you want to make sure that you're filling up the space vertically. And that's for this type of environment as well, because you certainly want to show up like that versus, this. Like there's two different, once you see things, you can't unsee them. So taking up and understanding that presence that has to happen visually, whether you're on camera or you're in person, that's how you blend and stay consistent in showing up consistently.
I love that. And one of the other things for those that are watching, one of the things that I love is how you've centered yourself in the greenery, right? There's greenery around you, both. You do see, and it's nice that it's that white textured background, so you show up so beautifully. And you do have your little Amy factor thing. But even so, you have made it so that it is totally centered. So we know that with video, and especially now with clips and all the stuff that we have, that you've centered yourself and it looks very professional and it looks really well. And I think that reflects, well, especially for what you do for a living, right? But when you think about it, that is really important. So when you see you and you see that, it really tells us, oh, wow, she's a professional. She takes it seriously, what she's doing. And I do think that is really, really important. But how would you say that, this is what popped into my head when we were talking about that, right? Is how would you say the ability to establish that strong visual presence? Because I know that you say that that can affect communication and leadership, right? So how does the ability to establish a strong visual presence affect communication and leadership? Now, I know that it does say something. It screams things, as a matter of fact, not just say it. It screams it. But really, honestly, I get the communication. Leadership, I really love that. So I really want to hear what you say about that. Totally get communication, but leadership, like how is that working? Because I really would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, well, leadership is a huge thing. Like, we are all leaders. To some extent, we influence those inside our space and those we connect with through the camera lens and just in our day-to-day lives. Like, there's a leadership aspect. We're influencing people. How do we make that impact and influence consistent? And why is that important? It's because we need to have, so in leadership, we need to have that authoritative presence. So you made a comment that I'm centered and I have greenery. And so those of you who can't see me, I want you to understand that things are all at a different level. And I do it because it's called the rule of thirds, and you can Google it. It's actually used in graphic design and photography in a huge way. So to give you the visual of rule of thirds is when a composition, a photograph, an image of somebody popping up on your screen, getting ready to, put out the hand of the visual handshake. It is the perfect combination of negative and positive space. It is allowing the human eye, because the human eye moves in a rule of thirds. So I help people set up in allowing the human eye to continue on moving all around me on both sides and always coming back to me as the main focal point. I don't want your eye to get stuck. Sure, it's great to see the AF over on the side of the Amy Factor logo, and it's there sometimes and it's not, and it's very subtle in a lot of ways. But the greenery, yes, doesn't encompass me, but they're at all different levels because it's keeping the human eye moving naturally. That, again, gives that visual presence, that ease, and it gives that essence of, hopefully you feel, of what it's like to be inside my space, inside my environment, working with me, whether it's on a professional level, a personal level, or just engaging and having a great conversation like we are. So it's important to understand that. The other thing is I can move to one of the rule of thirds and still allow that human eye to move naturally. So a lot of times I'll explain to your listeners of, if you think about watching the evening news or whatever, you will see them transition and have a bubble off to their right or left and things like that. And that's understanding the rule of thirds. So most of the time, if I'm doing a presentation, I will oftentimes be in one of the lines of the third versus the center. Now, I'm an animated person. Shocker, we're all three-dimensional beings. I truly believe that we should not just be talking heads. Like, how boring is that? We wouldn't be sitting on our hands inside of a boardroom or a coffee shop. Why? Or standing on stage. Why wouldn't we be interacting and giving ourselves free movement, which is the other reason why it's really bad to use a fake or blurred background, because you become, the Van Gogh where you're losing an ear or an arm, or, talk about distractions. So those are some things. Does that answer your question kind of?
It does. And it actually leads me into something that I have always found interesting too, is distraction. You just said it. I have found sometimes, like, for example, last week I was on a podcast and I was focusing on her, but I have to tell you, behind her, she had this huge, we're talking like 36 by 40 picture of a tiger. And she was sitting in front of it. And, as she'd move around, so it was distracting for me to see more of the tiger and like, what was she doing? And then there's times that I will see people, so I'm going to ask your opinion on these. So then there's times that I see people do the typical, I'm going to have a bookshelf and it's going to have all my books on it. And I'm going to turn this one here, or like here's a plant, or, and I'm sitting in this chair, whatever they're trying to do with that. I don't know, but it's been so overdone, right? But then also what I see is a lot of times people hanging things on the wall, like sayings or whatever, which I find that distracting because now I want to read them. And sometimes they're not straight. And then literally it will drive me bananas that it's crooked, whatever. So, but I mean, when you're talking about distractions, these are all things that distract you from looking at what you're looking at, where I know some of our listeners are listening, but we do have it on YouTube. So feel free to just go over there so you can see, even for 1 minute. But what I love is you are centered. And like you said, you can even move over, which does allow you to later on put verbiage in there too. We all know that that's also another thing you need to do. But even with all of that, we're not distracted at all. Your background has just enhanced you. And yes, a little subtle AF on the side for the Amy factor. It just really enhances that you didn't just have no branding, that you just, whatever, right? You know what I mean? And so I feel like minimizing, if not removing, those distractions are super important. Now, I know I just said a whole lot in that little space right there, in that little space of distractions, but talk a little bit about that. Like, what are some of the things that would really be mistakes? I always feel like I want to know what not to do just as much as I want to know what to do. So what would you say are some of the most common mistakes that really do take away from their visual presence and they doesn't enhance it at all, other than, of course, what we've said about the screen?
Well, that is a large question.
I know it is, but I'm larger than life, so I can't help it.
I love it. And distractions are a huge thing. Again, it's like getting dressed. In that whole old fashioned statement of take off one accessory before you leave the house. Okay. And that goes for both male and females. We can all overdo things at times. So there's that. So less really is more. So even though my back wall is physically textured, it's dimensional, it is subtle and it is highlighting me, obviously. I kind of have an eye for that.
Imagine that.
That's a little bit the AF factor, but the thing is, and when you brought up a good point, everybody, thinks, oh, let's, I'm an, a number one New York selling author, or, have been, have all these awards, and I have a PhD and all these letters and all these credentials. And we all think that we need to shove everything into our back to speak on our behalf of our credibility. our competency, our expertise. And in reality, those become distractions. We can't read what that diploma says, okay? It's a piece of paper in a frame. And now I'm going to go into the frames aspect of things. And when things aren't aligned properly and they're warped, and we've all seen it, or and I have no idea if the lion was in a frame or not. I'm in my mind, I was picturing it on maybe a stretch canvas, but maybe it was in a frame. But let's say the frame is, here in, slightly off center above the right eye, or it's in this coming out the center of her head, and that becomes a distraction. So think about where those lines are coming, and if they're a distraction or not. So my number one tip, and this is a little, nugget from inside my vault, is take a screenshot. Start your camera, take a screenshot, and print it off. Remember, back in the day when we actually took pictures and printed them off? Let's do that, but do it and then look at it. I want you to look at that image of you on screen on that piece of paper, because it's going to give you a different view than you just opening up your camera, starting a, potential meeting and looking at yourself. When you print that off, it's giving you the view of your audience view, and concentrate on it and think, look at yourself as your audience views you. Is there something off? Is there something distracting? Do I look like I have horns coming out of my head because I have, framed artwork or whatever on my back wall? Less is more. It's about being strategic. And I think the other big distraction is people don't understand scale and perspective. So I have proper scaled, obviously, I would hope I would, greenery behind me, including, my columns and my square and everything. And not everything is real. That's a real plant. Those two are artificial. There are ways of understanding that, but the key is scale and depth, perception. We have to proportion. We have to think about that. And those are the things you're going to need to look at and evaluate when you print off that screenshot of yourself.
I think that is really important. And it really does make a difference, because as I'm looking at your background while you were talking, I was thinking, well, your little square over there that says AF. I mean, if you were a bestseller of a New York Times book, having a little stand with just your book there is good enough, without having to have a whole bookcase of, unless you're a literary agent or, something where that actually speaks to your brand.
Exactly. And even going back to, I don't mean to interrupt you, Patty, but it was just a thought. And going back to your comment about bookshelves, they're tired. We've seen them a million times. Be creative with it. Maybe your bookshelf is back there, especially if you're in the literary world and publisher and all that. It speaks to that. But have it off center. Like if you've noticed, everything goes off my camera frame. It's done for a reason, that we don't have to have everything stacked.
Oh, so you don't have the whole plant. You just, now that I noticed it.
Go. There you go. Okay. I'm showing you my off the angles there. So, and I can push this back. I can pull it forward. I do this. I set this up so I'm able to take a step back, and I'll show you and be able to present to you standing up as well as sitting down. So it gives me that flexibility and that versatility to still be on brand, but have thought through all of the processes. And I think that's important when we think about those distractions. Like if I need to go show something or grab a file from back here, and by the way, I don't have a ton of space. So literally from my camera to this back wall, I'm touching it. I'm about 4 inches from my camera in that way, in that aspect. I'm wearing flats today and I'm about 5'7". So that gives you, so I'm probably somewhere around 5.5 feet-ish in this space.
I will say that I really loved a second ago when you stood up. So I thought that was really powerful. Like, I know that wasn't even part of what you were probably going to talk about, but I have to tell you, when you stood up in that space, because I was actually going to ask you that question, right? You know, about when people stand when they're doing like a podcast interview or literally you're giving a presentation. And so you're kind of moving around there. And so making sure that you're not distracting in that way when people see you move. But when you stood up, you were still perfectly centered, perfectly perfect right there. And that's awesome, right? You know, so I think that obviously this is why you do what you do and you're good at it, right? So that kind of leads me into, let's talk about that a little bit. Like, it's obvious that you didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'm going to be a visual presence designer, right? I'm sure you're probably the only one in the world. But what inspired you to become a visual presence designer? And how did you really like develop a passion really for transforming spaces, which is what I know I learned from you first, right? Is that, but really for spaces and enhancing visual presence, right? You know, because really, I think that has to be like, how did you get from there to there, right? You know?
Well, that's a great question, Patty. And it's, and it's interesting because as you're speaking, it takes me back to my journey and it takes me way back to probably my youth and being just a young girl with big dreams on a dairy farm in the middle of, you know, rural Wisconsin, to be honest. And it's one of those things where I've always had spatial intelligence. Didn't know what it was, but spatial intelligence really is my genius. It's innate in who I am. That's why I went into receiving an industrial design degree. And ironically, I went into that because I wanted to be a theatrical set designer. And long story short, through my receiving of my degree for industrial design, I ended up doing it on furniture design, which translated into doing, you know, mood modular after leaving the shopping center industry of doing retail design for 15 years. And developing this, you know, product that could be interchangeable and speak to people's essence in literally a snap of a finger because everything's magnetic. And, well, what attracts people to each of us is our magnetism. It's our it factor. It's our, it's what makes us be able to attract certain people and repel others. It's literally the thought of the magnet. So when it was a natural progression, in all honesty.
Well, it sounds like you're a designer in more ways than one.
Well, and through that degree, we touched on industrial psychology, which brings in that it, you know, and it was like this huge light bulb for me that came up in, so that's what that innate understanding of human psychology. Like I love people. I'm curious about people. I want to know what makes each other tick. I want to know like what's in your magnetic force that drew me to you. Like I want to understand that. And I think that was the bridge in understanding that Mood Modular is a fantastic product that has always wanted to showcase the best of people's business there, whether it was in the middle of a shopping center or it was on a trade show floor. And that obviously transitioned into you have this incredible product, here we are now being forced into our home. Why are we not utilizing them in their full potential of modular studio sets? And in the end, it's always been the Amy factor. It's always been, I have this great product, but there's been that magnetic piece to my product, which is no different than you are the magnetic piece inside your business. It's understanding those things that really sparked this awakening in me that had always been kind of simmered throughout everything. And it was really hearing that feedback of, yeah, you have a great product, but it's you. It's that energy.
You are the Amy factor, right? That is what it is. And you are magnetic and it brings people into you. And I think that makes sense. Now, I want to go back for a second to something we talked about a minute ago when we were talking about distractions and when we were talking about how some of the things have changed, like the bookshelf in the back and the plant on the table and some of those things. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but just saying. But things do change, right? So what, for lack of a better word, what trends do you see emerging in visual design so that professionals can prepare and stay ahead of the trends, right? You know, instead of trying to catch up, like what could you tell us, right, of what we can do that for those of us that don't have that already, that if they're going to do it, like, let's not catch up. How can we stay ahead of the curve, ahead of there? So what are you seeing some trends moving forward that we should pay attention to right now?
Yeah, and that's a great question. There are so many things. You know, we have the great AI bursting into every aspect of our lives, and that certainly is something that is here in the visual world, and hence the virtual backgrounds and things like that. It's, I think, only moving quicker and faster. I think what I want to say first and foremost is be cautious of who you're presenting yourself as on a virtual interaction and how that relates to what it's going to be like when you interact with that person in real life.
So in other words, don't look like a glamour shot like back in the day.
Yeah.
Don't let AI make you look like you're a glamour shot.
Exactly. So I'll speak to the keynote speakers of the world and big presenters in this regard. And really anybody in leadership and CEO that's going to take stage at any point in time, whether it's a virtual stage as we are on today, or if it's in a physical stage in an arena. And this kind of goes back to a few questions earlier that with the J-Lo, and I brought her. So my other end of that was, think about when we had, and it's because you brought up the glamour shot. There's nothing more distracting. So going in, we're just going to put a big old beautiful ribbon on this. When we go back to thinking about the headshots, and it's a huge craze and a trend right now to have AI do a professional headshot of you. Just like back in the days of great photographers who still do them today, we want to be very, very, very conscious in the fact that when you saw that headshot pop up on that main screen in the auditorium for the keynote to come out and blow you away, and they come out after their presentation and they don't even resemble being a distant cousin, again, it steps back to that credibility, that trustworthiness, that competency. The same thing happens when we show up on camera. And if they've looked you up as they should on whatever site, probably LinkedIn, because that's the most professional site that we're identifying people in. And granted, my hair shorter, longer, all that, but it's in the same realm. I at least hopefully
Well, we all
like.
want to look our best. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. But I have to tell you, probably the best compliment that I ever receive, and I hear it over and over and over again, is probably not what people would think. The one that I hear that I love, that resonates with me, is when people meet me after hearing me speak and, you know, all of the things that I do. And they say to me, you know what, Patty, you're exactly the same in person as you are on stage, when I see you on Zoom, and all of the things I've said, you're exactly the same. And that makes me feel so good because that's who I want to be, right? I want to show up as me. And I have to tell you, back in the day when I first became a speaker, I just didn't feel good about it because I didn't think that I was like Patricia Fripp, right? I didn't think that I, you know, could wear a soap opera dress, and that it just wasn't who I was. And the speaker coach said, well, you know what, Patty, you just need to speak on stages where people want to hear it the way you say it, which was the best piece of advice I'd ever got. And so I have always just made the decision that this is who I am, and either it will resonate with you or it won't, but not every person is your person. And I feel like let's just get that out there like right now. And you're right. I have seen people show up and you're like, whoa, they're, you know, and I would rather people meet me and think, oh my gosh, you look even better. Not that I don't look like whatever. So, you know, I think that is really important, which I think is kind of part of the Amy factor and the it factor that you talk about, right? You talk about the it factor, and I feel like it's actually part of like visual storytelling, right? You know, in a way, and in a big way, probably. But tell us a little bit about the it factor, because I know you brought my audience an amazing it factor gift. So tell us about the it factor, and then tell us about the gift that you brought for them, because I'm sure that after listening to this, and for those that are listening and not watching, they really want to do it, because I got the sneak preview, of course, and I loved it. So tell us about it.
Thank you. Well, go back real quick on the stage and in the trend. If you are, and this is going to go into the it factor, if you are a trendy person, that's part of your essence. If you are a classic person, don't worry so much about the trend that's coming down, because going back to your statement there of we're not meant to work with everybody. It's the whole magnet thought process. Magnets have a north and south pole on them. They're either going to connect or they're going to retract from each other. So think through that. So be conscious of who you are and what your essence is and what your overall it factor of your brand, both personally and professionally, is. So with that being said, that's where your visual storytelling comes in, because our environment, including us, like we're part of our environment in this digital age, speaks volumes before we ever utter a single word. So understanding your it factor, like what really is that magnetic piece that draws you in, like what are the things that maybe you can put in your background? Like I give this comprehensive thing to at least give you some basic guidelines of understanding. Are you a suit synergy? Are you an iconic pioneer? Maybe you're the purveyor of lux. Maybe you're a nomadic enigma. Maybe you're the redefined sophisticate. And you know what? You're probably a mix of all of those things. And that's the beauty of all the psychological tests out there, is we resonate with some piece of everything. But as a whole, there's something a little bit more toned in that just makes you on that it piece, that AF factor. And by the way, AF also stands for my maiden name initials of Amy Feedy. So that it factor can be as fabulous, as fun, as whatever you want it to be, but that becomes your it factor. So I have a quiz that you are able to jump on and get a whole comprehensive couple pages, actually, of what your it factor really says about you. So that's been
It is so beautiful. And for those of you that are watching, listening, whichever the case may be, just kind of look down underneath there, and there's a button there that's really easy for you to get it. You'll be seeing it a lot. So, and you want to make sure that you do. I'm not going to tell you which one I am, but once you find out which one you are, hey, I'd love a conversation to tell me. But speaking of conversation, Amy, how can people connect with you? What's the best way?
Oh, obviously LinkedIn is a great platform. I would think exactly, especially for your audience. TheAmyFactor.com is just the easiest web address. It is literally the AMY factor.com. Mood modular, it looks like a mud, MUD, but there are umlauts above the U. So mudmodular.com is my other website. And of course, most of the socials, especially Instagram for the most part.
That is awesome. So thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here and for being so generous and sharing your zone of genius.
Oh, Patty, thank you so much. And to your audience for having me. It's been fun. And I always I'm always willing to throw out a 20, 30 minute jump on Zoom conversation with anybody, especially after you've taken the quiz. If you have questions or, I love conversations.
Oh, thank you so much. And to my audience, thank you so much for being here with us today. And if you enjoyed this episode, and I am sure that you did, please like, subscribe, and review the podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you haven't already checked out our sister publication, our Marketing, Media, and Money magazine, please grab your free copy at www.m3digitalmag.com. Until next week, have a phenomenal week. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. To shorten your learning curve even more, make sure to grab your free copy of the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine at m3magazine.com. That's M3, magazine.com. I promise your business will thank you.